Hey, how we doing? I hope you enjoyed the last video on feelings and emotions and using them as foundational starting points and exploring that as the next step. So we've gotten to a point now so we need to address something we haven't addressed yet, which is composing. This video is not going to be really in depth into it. We just want to kind of take a look at it so we get an understanding of some of the concepts that are happening there. We've looked at all the basic building blocks. We've talked about how to move around in different scales and keys and things like that. We've talked about different types of abstract techniques and things you can do and resolve and resolving forward and things like that. We've talked about all kinds of other theoretical concepts for moving around inside of a composition or inside of some type of improvisation, and we've talked about feelings and emotions, things like that, but we haven't really addressed per se composition. So let's just take a look at composition real quick and talk about some things that can happen there. First of all, composing can be very personal. So the idea of teaching somebody how they're supposed to compose can be very difficult because a lot of people will compose in a lot of different ways. Some people are going to compose, they're going to go out and have ice cream, and then they're going to play a Star Wars video game for a while, and they're going to do something, that gets them going, that gets them thinking. They've got some kind of idea. They listen to Bach or Beethoven, or they listen to some Van Halen for an hour, or they listen to, they go jogging for 15 minutes before they sit down and try to calm themselves down and to get focused on what they're doing. Then they have a set procedure sometimes to what they do to get themselves rolling into a production, and sometimes it has to do with just picking up their instrument and just noodling around. Sometimes it has to do with bringing up an emotion, trying to think about an emotion and trying to bring that up and what that feels like, and then searching for trying to figure out how to voice that. Sometimes it has to do with some type of you've looked at some type of situation or some type of quote unquote area. I mean, I'm not sure how to word that. Different type of situations that could be related to what you want to sing about. Topics, I guess, would be a good way to put it. What topic do you want to address? What would that feel like? And how do I go about it? Do I start writing on music? Do I start in a certain key? Do I just start feeling around? Do I start in somewhat kind of a scale? And it's like, up to the things we've talked about so far, I'm hoping that most of those things we've talked about have been really useful tools. So when you get to this video on composing, that you already, no matter what we addressed here, that you can probably fall back into one of those videos we've talked about and be able to relate it very quickly to the subjects that we've spoken about so far up to this point in the series. So I've got a little notebook that I have that I use just to go through, and we're going to take a look at that. But just remember, one of the biggest things in composition is that it's a very personal thing, and some people will start out composing very differently than other people's. And sometimes that has a lot to do with what type of music they're playing or writing or what exactly they're trying to do, how they prepare for it, how they loosen themselves up, how do they get their mindset to really focus on what they're trying to do, how do they get themselves, thinking along those lines, to where they really have got it, developed into their mind that they're really ready to target trying to compose some certain type of genre or some type of situational music or for some certain topic or something like that. And those can be very varied. So it would very much pay for you to get on the internet and dig around and just look around at, various ways people get composing and how they set themselves up to compose. It's a very difficult topic that you very much find a whole lot of people do very differently, and it's very hard to say which one's correct or not, because you got Bob, Randy, and Ralph, and they all might have a different program they run when they're composing, and sometimes they don't even run their own damn program. Sometimes they do something else, they just get stagnant, and so they just do a backflip and start doing something off the wall to try to get themselves out of some kind of rut and run around around naked in the house with pink underwear on their feet listening to Zsa Zsa Gabor. I don't know, something just to get them going, get them out of, whatever kind of rut they might be in. And, and some of them might not want to share with you. So, that can be very true. So, that can be very hard. But let's just take a look at some things that I've written down, and we'll try to address those things to try to help you get moving forward to kind of get the composition mentality into you that you can get yourself going. We've talked about a lot of subjects, and a lot of the topics that we've talked about so far in the series should help a lot, but we haven't just directly addressed composition, which we're doing now. Let's take a look at some notes. Okay, so the first thing that I would suggest you do is get on the internet and start looking around at music composition. Really dig into it a little bit, and as you mess around and you make notes and put notes in a notebook or something, that you branch out on it into any subjects or related material you come into, that as you branch out, that you're going to run into things that maybe you weren't aware of or hadn't thought of, that opens up new doors and new worlds to you to explore, and really broadens your wisdom and knowledge about the whole concept of music composition. So and make some really good notes of that and keep a notebook of some of that stuff. That's the first thing I'd tell you to do. The first thing, now I'm not addressing that really in depth because which way you go and where you get information may very much vary from person to person. But you will find mountains of information, and just dig around, start digging into it. And now as far as composing, that sometimes sometimes I'll just pick up my guitar and I start noodling around and it just starts happening. Now, I normally, whenever I'm going to compose, sometimes have no direction and I'm just seeing what happens. And sometimes I do have direction. I've got to write 3 country songs or 3 rock songs or 3 classical songs. Or I've got to do, some type of genre or something, So I'll get my head set in that. Sometimes I can just pick up my guitar and start noodling around, pick a key, and then just start trying to figure out where I'm going to go with it. Sometimes not. And if I can't get something going and I go, okay, well, that's not working, we go back to some of the things that we've talked about in this video series so far, and might start digging around there a little bit and those things that we've talked about, and maybe see if I can get something going there. Well, if it doesn't happen that fast, and sometimes it doesn't, sometimes you just get a spark and off you go, and sometimes it might not work that way. Today I need to write a song that's kind of like William Jillians. Well, I just don't feel like Hank Williams today, bro. And it's like, I'm not getting any kind of blood bumping, nothing's happening. So, I'm going to figure out, find some way to get myself motivated or to get some kind of spark going so I can get funk and get rolling. So, I went through and made some basic guides. And it'll be like basic, subjects that I have a few notes. Most of this is like guides that are basically like this one here. I've made a few notes that I've, learned from composing previously, that if I start reading this stuff, it doesn't take long before my mind starts bouncing around and I start remembering stuff that I've done and things I've done and all the stuff where that can lead me, and all of a sudden, bam, pretty soon I get some kind of direction and I start rolling off in that direction and I'm pretty good to go. So it basically is an idea of some guides that just kind of get you rolling. Some guides, some composing guides that basically just get you rolling to where your mind starts, getting ideas, and you start to do something which creates more motivation and more action that starts to just get the whole thing rolling. So and after that's getting me something going, or if I'm not really rolling too much after that, I've got some basic understandings of, where to start. Where do I really start, with my composition? Where would be a good idea to start? What instrument would be a good idea to start if it's not just guitar? And, some notes about, getting started, and some basic concepts that I've put together from composing, because basically as you start to compose, you'll start to make notes because every composer may see it a little bit differently. And so you basically just need to get going, you know. And once you get going, that as you go, make notes about what you were thinking, what you're doing, how you got motivated, how you got rolling. What did you do? How did you think that through? What made you go to do that? Why did you do that? What da 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 da. So when you compose in the future, that you do that, it's just like music theory. You know, music theory is created so you have to start over from scratch every time you go create a song. So, you know, it's the same concept and it works really well. So, you know, basic structures, you go like the basic structures. Basic song structures, what kind of structure you use, the basics of hooks and motives and variations, rhythms. These are all basic forms, feelings, situations, transitions, what types of feelings and things like topics, what kind of topics, you know, substructures, advanced concepts like tempo change, signature changes, key changes, modulations, crescendos, retards. I mean, all these kind of things, making notes of it and going through it as you're trying to work through it to give you ideas, you know, to spark memory of things you understand that, you know, sometimes it just takes a little spark. You might see something like counterpoint that I've written down there in some basic substructures, and it just clicks something in you, and all of a sudden off you go, bro. You know, and then you just opened up a door for some reason. It got something go. It sparked something, and off you went. I've learned that's a huge thing. So once you get through that you know, you can look at basic like song structures like this here: intro, outro, pre-verse, verse, outro, pre-chorus, chorus, bridge, all that kind of stuff. Sometimes I'll just set things up in movements. There's the intro, first movement, transition, next movement, transition or no transition, next movement, da 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 da. So that I don't get wrapped up in this too much. Later on, if it works out into this kind of a form, then I'll name it later, unless I'm trying to make some type of song that has a form like that. So, you know, and then you get into things like, you know, composing definitions. Get up and really look into that on the internet when you're looking at music composition and the definition of composing, you know, and what all is involved in it and what all is happening there. So, you know, these concepts are very simple. And, you know, when this video that we're talking about composition, I didn't want it to get real complicated. I wanted you to see more that it's very personalized. Now, you can get together with somebody, and let's say that, you know, the reality of the situation is my whole video series on guitar so far up to this point has been a series on teaching you the structures and foundations of music, some advanced theory, some abstract theory, and, you know, some ideas on how to compose. And, you know, those, most of them all are integral structures and possibilities for you to use in your composition. So basically, when you start talking about composing, that whole concept can be very personal and very dependent on the individual, the type of music they're playing, the type of era of music, the type of form of music, and, you know, the feeling of it, the topic. All kinds of different things are going to really come into play on, you know, what kind of guidelines you really want to use when you're composing. We've already talked about the structure, so that's a given. You don't really have to worry about that. You already understand that if you watch this series up to this point, and a whole lot of information on some other things that you should really be delving into and exploring to better yourself as a guitarist and a musician. So when we get to this point of composition, that you basically have a whole lot of the tools already. And one of the things that I've tried to impart on people when they talk to me about composition is that basically that you'll develop as a composer. Now, if you really want to get in and study certain composers and get a lot of information and really study how they compose, that you really need to get information from them. I mean, it's not like it's really hard to study Bach or Beethoven and really know that's exactly what they were thinking. You know, how do you know what he was thinking when he started to compose that? How do you know that? I mean, you can sit there and dissect the music, But how do you know how he composed that? How did he think about those things? What got his mind thinking about that? What made him think about this or that or the other thing or that transition, that change or that movement, or do a bridge there or do some kind of thing? How do you know what made him do that? Well, it's about almost impossible, right? So, I mean, unless you were there asking him. So, you know, some modern composers, if you can get videos on like composers, you know, that are will actually teach you about what they understand about composition, can give you highlights and insight about how that individual works, what works for him. And you may pick some of that stuff up. Some of it may not work for you, some of it may. But the biggest thing about it is to understand the concepts we've talked about so far, being able to understand what those structures, concepts are, and then starting to utilize them and starting to experiment around with them and understand what we've talked about here in composition and just start composing. Start composing. You know, you have to, if you're, it's, you know, you're going to want to research a music a little bit if you have no experience composing, and really look at some compositions. You know, if in whatever genre you're looking at, if you've never composed before, to look at some of the compositions from those type of genres, those types of music, those eras or those forms of music, and study them for a little bit so that you can have some understanding of some of the basic structures that were being used, the arrangements, you know, what kind of, you know, basic, you know, song structures that they were using, and some basic, you know, ideas, you know, that they have a tendency to go back to have an understanding how to compose in that area. And that will take some time of you just investigating it. But sometimes it's just that basic of just getting yourself going. You know, getting some ideas sparked and get, you know, some idea of where you're going and just get started, you know. And then as you get stuck, start going through things like this we've talked about and, you know, I mean, even go look at it. Go back and look and read about it a little bit if you're getting stuck, and might send you off in some other direction or cause you to remember something that you hadn't remembered, or open up some new door that you haven't thought of. So music composition can be very complicated. It can be very hard to teach in a way that's going to, it's very much akin to me teaching you how to hold your guitar, how to hold your guitar pick, and how to teach you to have your own style and technique. That's very difficult because, you know, I mean, nobody taught Edward Van Halen or any number of guitarists how to sound exactly like them. They eventually developed that on their own from trial and error, from experimentation and utilizing it. And they didn't have all the answers when they started. It wasn't like any one of those guitarists developed their style and technique with every understanding what was happening. They had the same tools that I've tried to teach you so far in this series to, well, and maybe some didn't even have that much to work with. And then they had to just start trugging along, bro, and start experimenting and, you know, and start playing, you know, and going. So composition's the same way. As you utilize the things we talked about, and as you start trying to compose, and you start composing in, you know, in the guitar, you're using your software so you can write the music out, you know, as you compose it, that you will develop, just like you will develop as a guitarist with your style and technique. That will develop the same way. Your style of composing, how you compose, how you approach composition, you know, and what's comfortable for you, what gets you going, and, you know, what you need to do to get yourself motivated. It can be very complex, just like looking at how many number of different guitarists with different styles and techniques. Composing can be the same way, and there's that many, if not more, different techniques and styles for composition. So you have some understanding that I really try to steer clear of going, no, I'm going to teach you to be just like Edward Van Halen or Joe Satriani or Bach or whatever, because that's just plain wrong, bro, because you are not going to be them. You are going to be you, right? So, you know, me trying to teach you how to be them, it doesn't work out really well ever, because most of them that we all look up to didn't become somebody else. They became them. That's why we love them, because they're so cool at creating something else and becoming their own unique individual style and technique and you know, theoretical, you know, living legend or whatever, how you want to put it, that, the same thing with composing. And, they are interrelated, most assuredly. You have no doubt that this can be a very integral part, and interrelated and intercorrelated with your style and technique, because this may eventually, and most definitely will, begin to open new doors and make you, as you to see your own style and technique and things like that a little bit differently from you going through this and really working on your composition and forming your own, how you get started, what motivates you. How do you get unstuck? What do you do to get unstuck? When you get unstuck, and you get rolling again, what keeps you getting results, which causes motivation, which causes you to experiment some more, or keeps you going forward? And what is that? Make notes about it. It's just like, sometimes with your style and technique on guitar, that you may or may not make a whole lot of notes about that. You may. It's best to if you want to. But with your composition, I did, because I realized once I understood about music a little better, then I needed to make some notes about some things that are really comfortable for me, and understand how that at this point, which may change, we've talked about how things change, and I might go off in a different direction, what really gets me going, and how do I compose at this point. And sometimes I compose differently when I'm dealing with different types of music and genres. But, as a guitarist, a lot of times you may or may not get into so many different musical genres. You might really develop your own style and technique, which will basically really simplify your composition style and how you go about composing. So I hope that kept that really simple, and I really tried to break this down the same way I did most subjects, is it's more about you than me teaching you how to do it. I've given you most of the tools to do it, and I wanted to address it, directly here, so that it's a really huge open door that doesn't give you any, this is what you need to do. This is how you do it. That's how you do it. That's how you do it. I really didn't want to go there, because when you understand what kind of music genre, let's say that you really want to do movie scores. So you're going to go study music composition, and then you're really going to want to watch some videos on Bob, the music score producer, and really understand how Bob's mind works, and then Timothy's mind and Jimmy's mind, that are movie score producers, to really understand how they compose and what things excite them. Does that work for you? Does that not work for you? Because you might be into reggae or heavy metal or folk music, or some kind of weird Indonesian Asian thing, that you're really on a swing with some weird bandana and flowers in here. I don't know, bro. But, with you going through that you will address those things as you develop, and go look for people that may be along those lines to really look at, and trying to get as much information from them about how they compose, to see how it affects you. Don't think that that's the way you're supposed to do it. Those are ideas that might help you, because they help them, it might help you if you are in that same type of area. Does that make sense? But the biggest thing is going to be look at those basic concepts that we've just talked about, and the concepts that we've talked about so far in this video series, and just start composing. Try to make notes about how you're composing, what you're doing, and as you progress, and make sure that you write it down on, in music. Make sure you write it down on the staff and in tablature, whatever that we've talked about when we talked about addressing music, and just go, just roll, start composing, bro, and just let it flow and let it develop. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it wasn't too simple, but I basically want you to understand the basic concept that I look at it a lot, just like you developing your style and technique as a guitarist, that you just need to get doing it and just rolling, and you'll eventually understand how you best work with that. And then you go search out some people that you really look up to as composers, and see if you can get some information about what gets them composing, how do they see it, and that might help you move forward. So peace, hope, love. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I certainly hope you've enjoyed this series. I'll see you in the next one.